over every chapter twice. So I think my sister taught chapter 5 about a month ago, and we're going to delve into some different passages from chapter 5. There's some very meaningful and deep thoughts in this chapter, and there are some very Kabbalistic, but also very practical and relevant ideas that we're going to explore. So let's begin with the very first chapter, the very first Mishna of chapter 5. We'll read the Hebrew and then we'll read the English. So I'll start with the Hebrew. My bad. Okay. Basar Maimaras Nivra Ha'olam. The world was created with 10 divine utterances. Uma Talmud Lomar, and what does this come to teach us? V'halo b'maimar achad yachol lehibaros ela lahafriya min harashaim shemabidin es ha'olam shenivra b'asara maimaros. So what does this come to teach us? Surely God could have created the world with one utterance. So why 10? And the answer that's given is it was to exact payment from the wicked who destroy the world that was created with 10 utterances. V'litain schar tov latzadikim shemekayin es ha'olam shenivra b'asar maimaros, and to give a reward to the righteous for sustaining the world that was created with 10 utterances. So here we go. This is the first Mishnah of chapter 5. There's a lot to explore here. I'll start off with something that we mentioned last time I taught the Pirkei Avot, which is right away we see that the rabbis ask, what do we learn from this? And chapter 5, this is a very interesting chapter of Pirkei Avot because it goes into, the whole chapter is divided by a series of numbers. So the first few Mishnahs go through the number 10, and it gives us different events that happened in Jewish history that occurred in a series of 10. So the events that it goes through, this is the first one. It says that the world was created with 10 utterances, and it says that there were 10 generations from Adam, the first man, till Noah. Noah was the story of Noah and the ark. And then it says that there were 10 generations from Noah until Abraham. It goes through the 10 trials that God gave to Abraham. It says that God tested Abraham 10 times and he passed each time. It goes through the 10 miracles that God performed for the Jewish people in Egypt. It goes through the 10 miracles that God performed for the Jewish people in the desert. And it goes through 10 miracles that God performed for the Jewish people in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash. So the beginning of the chapter is all about the number 10. And it goes through these different events in Jewish history that occurred within the sequence of 10. But what's interesting is that right away, the rabbis say, what does this come to teach us? Because before we go into these historical events that are all listed in numbers of 10, we right away have to remind ourselves that the Torah is not a history book, that even though we're going to be listing these different historical events, the Torah should never be perceived as a book of history or a book of philosophy. The Torah is every single story, every single idea that is brought in the Torah is there to teach us a lesson. It's there to teach us a personal life lesson that can guide us in our life. And so even though we're listing, we're telling about a historical event of God creating the world, right away the rabbis say, what does this come to teach us? Because there's a deeper lesson here that we're going to learn from these events. So what does this come to teach us? The Mishnah says, on a simple level, it says that God wanted to create the world with 10 utterances because he wants to increase it doesn't say punishment, and we're going to speak about that soon, but we'll use that word loosely here. He wanted to increase the punishment for the wicked, and he wanted to increase the reward for the righteous. So if a person does something wrong, they're not only causing chaos in a world that was created with one utterance, but they're causing, they're bringing negativity into a world that was created with 10 utterances, not just one. And so too, if a person does a good deed, they're not just bringing godliness into a world that was created with one utterance, but 10 utterances. So an example here could be given, just to put it in more practical terms. God is trying to like up the ante. He's trying to make the raise the bar, like this, there's a higher consequence to your actions. So for example, if a person spends 1 month building a home, and then, somebody or some natural disaster comes and destroys the home, it would be a lot less upsetting as if the person spent 10 months or 10 years building the home, because they invested so much more into it. So if it was destroyed, it would be so much more devastating. So too, God is saying, I invested 10 utterances into the creation of the world. And so when you do a good deed, you are uplifting the world I invested so much into it. And God forbid, if a person does something wrong, they are adding negativity to a world where God had invested so much into it. So we can understand this on human terms, that the more you invest into something, the more the stakes are higher, right? If you invest 10 hours into something, it's different than if you invest 1 hour into something. But so this idea works for us human beings. But can we say that there's a difference for God? Is there a difference between 1 utterance and 10 utterances for God? I don't know if we could say that, because we say, God is infinite. And for infinity, 1 and 10 are the same, right? So if God created the world from nothing, it says that God created the world through dibur, through speech, like we have here, utterances. God spoke the world into existence. And so it says in Genesis, the very beginning of the Torah, in Bereshis, God says 10 different utterances to create the world. It says, God said, let there be light, and let there be a firmament, and let there be a heavens and an earth and the oceans and the animals. And through these 10 utterances, that's how the world came into being. So if God could create the world through speech, God can bring into existence something from nothing. Literally, God created this world, something from nothing, which is something that only God can do, of course. We don't have that ability. We as human beings, we can create something. We can take raw materials and create something new, but it's not something from nothing, because we're using those raw materials to create something new. So really, it's not creation at all. What we as human beings have the ability to do is we can form new things, or we can construct new things, but we cannot create as God can use his speech to create the world. So if we're speaking about an infinite God, our first question here is, how can we say that God invests more in 10 utterances than 1 utterance? For God, 1 and 10 should be exactly the same. Compared to infinity, 1 and 10 are the same. There's no difference. So how could we say that there's more effort for God to speak 10 utterances than 1 utterance? And secondly, the second question I think that is interesting about the answer that the Mishna gives is that we know that God is a kind and compassionate God. And interestingly enough, it seems like the whole purpose of creating the world with 10 utterances, according to this Mishnah, it says, is to increase reward on the righteous. But first it says to increase payment, or to increase punishment on the wicked. And in a way, it's interesting. Why would God want to increase the punishment for the wicked? We know God is kind and compassionate. Why would God want to increase the punishment for the wicked? And also, why is the wicked put before the righteous person? Shouldn't we first mention the righteous person and then mention the wicked person? It seems like the wicked person is the number one goal, and the righteous person is only secondary. So we have a few questions that we're going to go into, but that's like some questions that pop out when we read this Mishnah. So in Kabbalah, it's explained that God created the world. When God created the world, he divided himself into 10 attributes. It says that God has 10 attributes, and we human beings are created in God's image. It says that man was created in God's image. And so we too have these 10 attributes. And so the fact that God created the world with the number 10, with 10 utterances, teaches us something really, really interesting. And it's a nuanced idea, but it's a very powerful idea that God didn't need 10 utterances to create the world. Like we said, for God, 1 and 10 are the same. If God could create a world out of nothingness, he could have done it in 1 utterance just as easily as 10. So for God, 1 and 10 are the same. God purposely chose to create the world with 10 utterances. Why? So the Kabbalists, or our rabbis, explain that God specifically wanted the number 10. He specifically wanted to create a world out of 10 attributes, 10 utterances. And the reason is this, because if God had created the world with 1 utterance, then the entire world would be unified and one with God, because God is one. God is the only existence, the only being. And so God knew that if he created the world with 1 utterance in one moment, the world would be engulfed and enveloped in God's oneness. There would be no separation between God and the world. It would be a complete oneness of us with God, and we would all feel that in our everyday life. We would feel that we are one and united with God, and there's no separation between me and God. And God didn't want that. Interestingly enough, God didn't want that. Why? He wanted there to be division, and he wanted there to be plurality in this world. And the reason is because God wanted to give us the opportunity to reveal God's oneness in this world. If God had created a world where we only experience godliness and where we only experience God's oneness, that wouldn't be a meaningful oneness, because we would have no other option but to be united with God and to be united with the rest of creation. There would be no other option. But when there is the option for division, and there is the option for, not necessarily living in line with God's oneness, and when a person chooses that oneness and a person chooses to recognize God's oneness in this world, that is what fulfills the purpose of creation and brings down God's light and God's oneness in a way higher way than if God had done it himself. So God wanted there to be this possibility for division in order for us to create that oneness within this world. For example, if a person is stranded on an island, a person is in solitude on an island, can we say that there's peace on that island? No, because peace only exists if there's a possibility for conflict, or if there's a possibility for war. If a person is alone, stranded on an island, you can't say that person is living in peace because they're the only one there. Now, if you have 2 people on an island, then you can say that there's peace, because 2 people with different desires and different ideas were able to come together in peace. And how much more so if you have thousands or 1 million people on the island and they all live together in peace, then you can call that peace and love, because different people with different personalities and different ways of looking at the world were able to come together in peace. So God wanted there to be that division in order for us to create unity in this world. And that's the reason why the Mishna puts the wicked before the righteous, where usually we would think that first we should mention the righteous, and then secondary we can mention the wicked. But no, first we mention the wicked, because the ultimate purpose of creation was in a way for the wicked. I don't want to say wicked. I'm going to say people that are imperfect, people that mess up, people that make mistakes. Because if God had wanted a perfect world, right? If he wanted a world that was completely one with him, he would have created the world with 1 utterance. He would have created a world of oneness. And if God wanted a world of perfect human beings, he would have created us as perfect human beings with no flaws, with no ego, with no anger. He would have created us perfect, but he didn't. He created us as human beings with flaws. And we have our, our issues and our ego and things that we have to overcome, our struggles that we have to overcome. God gave us those struggles on purpose. He gave them to us for a reason. God doesn't make mistakes. He didn't create imperfect human beings by accident. He created us this way on purpose because he wanted us to overcome our challenges. He wanted us to fight the darkness and reveal the light, because it says Yisrona or min hachoshech, that the light, the or that comes from darkness has an advantage, because light that was always light, meaning a righteous person that was always righteous, that was born perfect with no evil tendencies and no negative character traits, that's wonderful. But a person that experiences darkness, a person that has struggles and overcomes them, that light is so much greater. The light that comes from darkness has an advantage. It's greater than light that had always been there. And so that's why it says that by creating the world with 10 utterances, by creating the world with division, God increases the payment of the wicked. What does that mean? It doesn't say punishment. The word that's used is to exact payment from the wicked, meaning when a person errors and a person makes mistakes, and then they go and they fix those mistakes, like they pay back those mistakes that they made, and they fix those things that they had done wrong, that person is fulfilling the purpose of creation. That person is actually, their reward is so much greater because they just accomplished what God had intended all along, to create an imperfect world and to create imperfect people that then reveal godliness in the world through their imperfections and through their struggles. And so it was a very intentional thing that, of course, God could have created the world with one utterance. God could have created the world with 0 utterances, right? If God is a being that can bring something into being from nothing, just by willing it into existence, it could have been created. God didn't need utterances to create the world, but God specifically chose to create the world with 10 utterances, and specifically chose to create the possibility for there to even be wicked people, right? If God had created the world with oneness, there would be no possibility for people to make mistakes. Everything would be united with God, and the world would just be a place of godliness and holiness, and there would be no other existence besides God. But by giving us these options, by giving us this free choice of choosing light over darkness, by choosing peace and love over division, that is what creates the world that God had intended all along. So this is the first Mishnah. There's a lot to digest here. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and ask. But we're going to skip to the second half of the chapter 5. This was the first Mishnah. And we're going to skip to Mishnah 16 and 17 because they have some very, very powerful ideas there. And I think my sister maybe last month, had taught some of the middle Mishnahs that we're going to skip over. So we're going to jump right ahead to Mishnah 16. So we're kind of shifting gears here. This is a different idea entirely. So if anyone has any questions on the previous idea, feel free to ask. Okay. So Mishnah 16 reads as such: Kol ahava shehi taluya badavar, batal davar betela ahava. So ahava means love. Any love that is dependent on a condition, when the condition ceases, the love ceases. V'she'ena taluya badavar, ena betela lo'olam. But if a love is not dependent on anything, it will never cease. It will last forever. Ezahi ahava shehi taluya badavar. What is an example of a love that was dependent on something? So it's going to give us an example from the Torah, and we're going to explain these stories, the backstory behind this. But it says, Zo ahava Amnon and Tamar. This was the love between Amnon and Tamar. We're going to explain who these characters were. V'she'ena taluya badavar, and an example of a love that was not dependent on anything. Zo ahavat David ve'Yonasan. This is the love of David, King David, and Yonasan. Okay, so this idea is something that I think is fundamental and foundational for, I think we could all agree, any relationship, that when love is dependent on something, when there's a reason why you love a person, if that reason goes away, God forbid, the love goes away. But if a person loves another person for no external reason, it's an essential, unconditional love, then that love is going to last forever. It can never, ever cease because it's not dependent on anything. And so the examples that are given here are Amnon and Tamar. So Amnon and Tamar, who were they? It's a very sad story, but Amnon and Tamar were the children of King David. They were half siblings, so they weren't from the same mother. They were both from King David, but from different wives. Amnon and Tamar, so they were half siblings. They were the children of King David. And the story goes that Amnon loved Tamar. She was a very beautiful woman, and he loved her. It says that he loved her, and he, in short, he tries to convince her to be intimate with him, and she refuses. And ultimately, he rapes her. And it says that after Amnon, he defiles Tamar afterwards, it says that he hated her. He had this like hatred towards her. And so the question, of course, is where did the love go, right? He loved her so much. But of course, this is the epitome, this is the perfect example of what the Mishna is saying here, that a love that is dependent on something, it cannot even be called love. Because did Amnon really love Tamar? No, he thought she was beautiful, and maybe he felt lust for her, but he didn't love her. And so that's why as soon as the condition for his love ceased as well, and he actually hated her, he despised her. So they are the example, Amnon and Tamar are the example of a love that was dependent on something. And I think essentially we can even dismiss that it's not even love in the first place, because it was never love to begin with, because it was always dependent on something external. Either if a person, like in this example, if a man loves a woman because of her beauty, or if a person befriends somebody because of they're trying to get something out of the relationship, that's not a real relationship. That's not real love. That's not real friendship, because as soon as the factor that the love is dependent on goes away, the love ceases as well. And the example, on the other hand, on the other side of the coin, on a more positive note, what is an example of a love that is not dependent on anything? And this is the beautiful story of David and Jonathan. So David, we all know King David. Who was Jonathan? Jonathan was the son of King Shaul. King Shaul was the first king of Israel, and King David was the second king of Israel. Now, King David was not Shaul's son. Jonathan was Shaul's son. So what happened here? Shaul was appointed as the first king of Israel, and he sinned, and he didn't listen to God. God gave him very clear instructions that he didn't obey. And therefore, God said that my kingdom is not going to continue through Shaul. It's going to continue through David. And so God chose to anoint King David as the next king of Israel. King David was from a different family and a different tribe than Shaul. But we know that King David grew up in the court of King Shaul. He used to play the harp for King Shaul. And so he grew up with Jonathan. Jonathan and David were childhood friends that grew up together. And what's beautiful about this friendship, and what we were learning from this friendship, is that naturally we would assume that Jonathan would have a hatred towards David, because what happened? Jonathan, who would have been the next king of Israel, had his father not sinned, his kingship was taken away from him and given to David. So naturally we would assume that Jonathan would hate David because he stole the kingship from him. But no, what we see is that Jonathan and David remain best friends throughout their life. And Jonathan, even when King Shaul is trying to kill David, when King Shaul finds out that David is going to take him over, and David has to run and hide for his life, Jonathan actually helps David escape from his father, because his love for David was unconditional. It wasn't dependent on anything. And therefore, even when Jonathan knew that David is going to be the next king instead of me, he still loved David, and they still had this bond and this close friendship. And the reason is because Jonathan knew that David didn't steal the kingship from him, God forbid. God had chosen David as the next king because of David's holiness and because of his righteousness. And so the decision for David to become the next king was God's decision. It wasn't like David was, doing anything against Jonathan. And so because their friendship and their love was unconditional, it wasn't dependent on anything, it remained and it held strong throughout their life. And so in life in general, in any relationship, it's important to love and appreciate and accept another person for who they are at their core, for their essence, because the Torah tells us, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," you should love your fellow as you love yourself. And this seems like almost an impossible task. We can ask ourselves, how can I love another person like I love myself? And this is the answer. The story of Yonasan and David and this Mishna that tells us that love cannot be dependent on something is the answer. If we are focusing on the things that divide us, on our externals, on the outside conditions of why we might love somebody, maybe because they look in a certain way, or because they do a certain thing, or because they provide me with a certain thing, that's not true love, and that love will not endure. It has to be, I love this person because they are a human being, they are a child of God, they have a soul, and they are a pure, beautiful person, and they deserve my love and respect purely because they exist. God created them. If God chose to create this person, it means that they have a mission in this world, they have a soul, and they have something beautiful to contribute to the world. And therefore I can love them unconditionally, regardless of what they provide for me, or the way they act or look, or anything external that may divide us. We can always focus on the essential beauty of every person and then love them unconditionally. And so that is true love, and that is true friendship between, we see David and Jonathan, that even the one thing that we would think would get in between their relationship, it doesn't get in between their relationship because they had this unconditional love. And I think, like, let's say in a marriage or in any friendship or relationship, if we have this unconditional love, even if things get in between us, that, external things can never really divide us because we have that unconditional love between two people. Okay, we'll move on to the next Mishnah. If anyone has any questions, please. I haven't been checking in on the chat, so maybe I'll do that quickly if there's anything in the chat that I'm missing. Okay. Again, unmute yourself if you have any questions. Let's move on to chapter. I didn't update this. This is 17. So this is Mishnah 17, and it reads as follows. It says, Kol machlokat shehi l'shem shamayim sofa lehiskayim. Any dispute or any controversy that is for the sake of heaven is destined to endure. V'she'ena l'shem shamayim ein sofa lehiskayim. And if it is not for the sake of heaven, it will not endure. Ezehi machlokat shehi l'shem shamayim. What is an example of a dispute that was for the sake of heaven? Zo machloket Hillel v'Shamai. This is the dispute between Hillel and Shammai. V'she'ena l'shem shamayim, and a dispute that was not for the sake of heaven. Zo machloket Korach v'chol edaso. This is the dispute of Korach and his congregation. So again, we'll explain who these figures were: Hillel, Shammai, Korach, and his congregation. But firstly, let's understand what the Mishnah is teaching us here. So it says that a dispute that's for the sake of heaven is going to endure, and a dispute that's not for the sake of heaven will not endure. What does this mean? There are two types of conflicts. The one type of conflict that is for the sake of heaven would be when both parties are trying to discover the truth. If both sides are trying to find the truth, then no matter what the outcome is, they both are victorious. They both win, because if ultimately you discovered the truth. So even if your opinion had been wrong the whole time, you still won because you found the truth. You were enlightened. And the second type of dispute, the second type of controversy would be a controversy where both sides are trying to gain power. Both sides want to be right. I want to be right. I don't care if, I don't care if what you're saying makes more sense. I just want to be right. So in this case, both sides will always lose. Why? Because even the person that won and overpowered the other person, first of all, they never came to an ultimate truth. And second of all, he only overcame the other guy by putting someone else down. So the only reason he won, or the only reason why he like accomplished his goal, is by pushing someone else down. And so ultimately both parties lose. And so the litmus test of if a dispute or an argument is for the sake of heaven, or is a pure argument, is if when you conclude the argument, when you, let's say, I don't want to say lose because you both win, if you walk away in friendship and in kindness, that is a dispute that is for the sake of heaven. But if both parties walk away with animosity and anger towards each other, that is a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven. And the example here that's given is Hillel and Shammai. Now, this is very interesting. Who were Hillel and Shammai? They were two of the greatest sages of the Mishna, and they were two sages, two rabbis, that would constantly debate with one another. They were notorious for disagreeing with one another. And so Hillel and Shammai were coming from two very different perspectives, and they almost always disagree with one another. But what's interesting is that it says their dispute is going to last forever. Until this day, we still learn both sides. We still learn Hillel and Shammai's opinion. And that's because both Hillel and Shammai had the same objective. Even though they were debating with one another, even though they were, you could say, arguing with one another, they had the same goal. And their goal was to interpret the Torah accurately and to find the truth of what God is saying in the Torah. And so because Hillel and Shammai had the same goal in mind, even though they were constantly debating and constantly disagreeing, they had the same goal. So they were always both victorious. No matter what the conclusion is, they both win because both of their goal was the same. And I think this is in any argument or any relationship, again, that if you have the same goal in mind, even if you disagree, it's fine. It's okay to disagree as long as your goal is the same. Because if two people, let's say a husband and a wife, they both want to strengthen their relationship and do what's best for their family. And so even if they have different opinions of what that might be, ultimately their goal is the same. And so they can come with different opinions and they can consider each other's opinion while still working towards the same goal. And so what's interesting about Hillel and Shammai is that the Talmud says, so we almost always go by the opinion of Hillel, even though basically the Talmud is, the discussion of the rabbis back and forth. And then halacha, which is Jewish law, comes and gives us the final, almost like the final decree of this is what we as Jewish people live and go by. But we still learn both sides. So even though Jewish law almost always sides with Hillel, I think there's only 7 instances where we side with Shammai. We still learn both sides because it's still interesting. Shammai wasn't wrong. He just was coming from a different perspective. And so we learn both sides, but ultimately Jewish law is almost always determined by Hillel, not Shammai. But the Talmud says something very interesting. It says that the reason why we go by Rabbi Hillel and not Rabbi Shammai is because the students of Rabbi Hillel had a custom, and every time before they would state their own opinion, they would always first and foremost state the opinion of Shammai. And so imagine this, every time they were going to come up with their verdict, with their opinion, they always first cited the other opinion, the opposing opinion. So the Talmud says this is why we follow Hillel, because they had this quality, the students of Hillel had this amazing quality of always citing the other side before their own side. And they always let Shammai or Shammai students speak before speaking themselves. Now, this is very interesting if you think about it, because it's a beautiful trait and it shows the great humility of Hillel and his students. And humility, of course, is a very important trait. But why is this the reason why we side with Hillel? Why is this the reason why Jewish law is determined by Hillel and not Shammai? Seemingly, law is different. You can't combine good character and law. The law has to go by who's right, who is bringing the more the more accurate judgment? Who's bringing the more accurate opinion? Whoever's opinion is more accurate, that's the opinion we should follow. Why is it that we follow Hillel? Because the Talmud says, not because, it doesn't say because his opinions are more accurate. It says because he always cited Shammai's opinion before stating his own opinion. He always lets Shammai speak before speaking. What's the reason here? It's like, imagine you have two lawyers in a court case, and one lawyer is kind and compassionate and soft-spoken, and the other lawyer is aggressive and, he's harsh and he's aggressive. It's nice, you like the other lawyer better, but if the judge were to say, I'm gonna go with the nice lawyer, not the aggressive lawyer, even though the aggressive lawyer has a stronger case, because this guy's nicer, that wouldn't be fair. That wouldn't be just. So how could we say that the Torah's law is determined by Hillel because he had this trait of humility? It seems like they're two separate things. Like, it's amazing that they were so humble, but why is that the reason he determines Jewish law? And so I heard a beautiful answer given, and that is that when the Talmud says that Hillel and his students used to first cite the opposing opinion before stating their own opinion, it wasn't just telling us how virtuous they were, or it wasn't just telling us how kind or humble they were. It's actually praising, or it's actually proving the intellectual integrity of Hillel and his students. What does this mean? That Hillel and his students had an opinion, but before stating their opinion, they always first checked what is the opposing opinion. And so that made their argument more wholesome and more honest, because they were taking into account the other opinion. If a person has an opinion and they have this strong ideology and this strong belief, but they never considered the opposite, they never considered the opposing opinion, then maybe it's just brainwash, or maybe it's just, maybe they're just closed-minded and they never thought anything differently. But if a person takes both sides into account, their opinion is actually more valid, because they looked at it from both perspectives before coming to a conclusion, versus just looking at it from one perspective and completely blocking out and ignoring the other side. And so it's not just that Hillel was humble, it's actually saying that Hillel's opinion was more wholesome and it was more accurate because he always quoted Shammai's opinion. And I think it's a beautiful lesson that a lot of times we have these ideas and these opinions, and anyone who doesn't agree with us is shunned or ignored, or we write them off immediately. And here we learn that to have a true, intellectually honest opinion means that you considered the opposite, means that you thought about the possibility of someone else being right and you're actually wrong. And unless a person considers the opposite, unless a person considers the opposing opinion, their opinion is not as valid, because they didn't take the time to consider the opposite opinion. And so Hillel's opinion, and in general, any debate that is trying to seek truth, anyone who's trying to reach a truthful conclusion, has to look at it from both sides, has to see, this is what my opinion is, but wait, let me pause and see, what is the opposite opinion? Maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe there's a different way to look at it. Maybe there's a different way to see things. And that's how a person really has an open mind and keeps trying to search for the truth, by seeing things from all perspectives. Okay, so the example given of a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven is Korach and his company, or his congregation. Who was Korach? Korach was a relative of Moses, who, after Moses had freed the Jewish people from Egypt and they were journeying through the desert, Korach rose up, he gathered a congregation, and they started to rebel against Moses. And he started to say, Moses, why are you taking so much power? Korach himself wanted a position of power, and he was upset that he wasn't given one. And so he gathered a group of people, and they started to revolt against Moses. And this is the perfect example of a dispute or a controversy that is not for the sake of heaven, because Korach, what was he searching for? He wasn't searching for the truth, because everyone knew that Moses was the leader chosen by God. Moses was the one who performed all of the miracles, and Moses was the one who freed them from Egypt. So Korach wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for his own power. He was looking to be right. He was looking to gain power for himself. And so because he was motivated by selfishness, his revolt or his revolution against Moses ended immediately. It says that the ground opened up and swallowed Korach and his men. And of course, it's interesting. It doesn't say Korach and Moshe, right? By Hillel and Shammai, we say the dispute of Hillel and Shammai, because Hillel and Shammai used to debate with one another. But Korach, it doesn't say Korach and Moses. It says Korach and his men, because it was a one-sided debate. Moses did not engage in this debate with Korach. Korach and his men were fighting Moshe, but Moshe wasn't fighting back. And so it doesn't say that Korach fought with Moshe. It says Korach and his men, because it was this one-sided debate where Korach was trying to pursue his own power. And of course, it didn't end well, because he was not seeking truth. It was not a debate for the sake of heaven. It was a debate for his own power and his own desire to gain power. So again, the lesson here, I think, is that in general, when we encounter someone or a situation that opposes our opinion, it's to be intellectually honest means to say to ourselves, what is the other perspective? Am I missing something here? And being open to the other side. And that doesn't mean that you're giving up your opinion. You can still hold on to your beliefs and your opinion while still considering where is this other person coming from? And if you do come to the conclusion that you had been right all along, that's fine, as long as you took the time to consider the other side. And it wasn't just, I believe what I believe because I'm narrow-minded and I'm only looking at it from one perspective. It's I believe what I believe because I've considered all the other options and I've still come to this conclusion that these are my beliefs. So I think, just in conclusion, what's interesting about chapter 5, Mishnah 16 and Mishnah 17 is both are discussing two different emotions, or two different traits. One is love and one is controversy or debate. And we see these as opposite emotions, right? Love and conflict are opposite. But what this Mishnah is coming to show us is that conflict is not a bad thing necessarily, as long as it's coming. It all depends, what is the foundation? Is my conflict driven by selfishness, or is it driven by trying to discover the truth, or selflessness? If a person is truly trying to discover the truth, that comes from a place of selflessness where they're saying, I could be wrong, I want to know what the truth is. And so both of these emotions, love and conflict, as long as they're based in selflessness, they're going to endure, and they're positive, and they are for the sake of heaven. But if either of these emotions are based in selfishness, so love that is selfish or conflict that is selfish, that is a negative thing, and that is not going to endure. And so that's chapter 5. I think next week is the last class of Pirkei Avot. So it's been a real honor and a real pleasure to explore this text with you all. So many practical and eye-opening things. At least for me, preparing these classes has been so meaningful and so eye-opening for me. So thank you all.
Malka, I just had a question about opinions and beliefs, because you mentioned opinions and beliefs. Do you think that there's a difference between a belief and an opinion, where a belief is like a core value and something that you truly believe in, and an opinion is something that can be changed based on observation and intellectual curiosity and being open for the truth?
Yeah, I do think so. But I think in even a belief, if a person is, following it, it's good to examine one's beliefs and see, like, why do I believe this? Or what makes me believe, what's motivating me to believe this? because that it only strengthens your belief. If anything, exploring other ideas could strengthen your beliefs because you realize how fundamental and how important these are to you. So I think it's there are people that live certain lifestyles because they chose it and because it's like so meaningful to them, and they've seen everything else and they're like, this is what speaks to me. And there are people that live a certain lifestyle because they've never experienced anything else and they're closed up in this box. So even a belief could be explored and challenged in a way.
Right. I really like that point, because especially in the times that we're living in, I think people have different opinions about things, and it's so important to be open-minded, to try to listen and to understand other people's ideas. And if you don't agree with them, ultimately, that's okay, but not to like stigmatize people or, use words that kind of like just to label people in a certain way just because they have an opinion and a belief, and in so many different areas during these days and times that we're living in, people do have different ideas and beliefs. And I think it's important to go the way of Hillel and Shammai as opposed to the way of Korach and his men.
For sure. And I thought of it. I didn't want to bring it up, of course, because not to get political, of course, but when I was learning it, I definitely had those thoughts of like, in America today, everything is so divided. And if we look at division as an inherently negative thing, it's not inherently negative. It's okay that there's different opinions. It's actually good that there are different opinions. The thing is that it becomes negative when it becomes selfish, personal and trying to get power. So if there's division that's driven by power, hunger, and selfishness, that's a negative thing. But difference of opinions is not a bad thing. It's actually, when I learned this, it really opened my mind to realize like, wow, maybe these different opinions are a good thing. It's good that people think in different ways. And if only we were open to each other's opinions and we could consider the opposite opinion, it doesn't mean you have to give up your beliefs and your opinions, but you can still be open to someone else's opinion. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's what makes us so colorful and so beautiful. It's what makes, when you meet somebody, you have the opportunity to learn something new. And if you think that you know everything and there's nothing this person could teach me, you're actually missing out on an opportunity to learn something new from this person. And it's okay to listen and not always be the one speaking. It's okay to hear a different opinion without, either you could share your opinion, but share it after hearing the other person's opinion. Like Hillel, it says he always listened to Shammai first and then spoke his opinion.
Which goes back to which really goes back to the 10 utterances, actually, because if Hashem wanted us to be, monochromatic and all thinking the same way, then he could have created us, like you said, with one utterance and all together. But the fact that he created the world, the 10 utterances, means that there's room for differences of opinion, and that's okay, and then that's actually healthy, and it's the way God created the world to be.
Yeah, exactly, Molly. You got it. That's a really good connection. That's beautiful, for sure. And that's really what it is. Like, I once heard a story. I'll finish off on this because I think it's a beautiful story. I remember how the story goes. Okay. A boy once came to the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, said, why did God create us this man was struggling with many different things. And he asked the Rebbe, he said, why did God give me these challenges? Why did God give me these struggles? Why didn't God create me just like an angel with, in pure perfection? Like, why am I struggling with all of these things? And the Rebbe said, when you go to an art gallery, right, and you see beautiful paintings, what's more priceless? What's more expensive? A painting or a photograph? And of course, we know, the man said, a painting is almost always more expensive than a photograph. Why? The Rebbe said, why? A photograph, if anything, is more accurate, right? A photograph, if you're taking a picture of a landscape, the photograph is going to be perfectly accurate, while a painting of the landscape might have some different tweaks. It might have some different colors that were incorporated. It's not going to be as accurate as the photograph. So why is the painting more expensive than the photograph? And of course, the answer is that the photograph the person didn't put any effort or any personality into the photograph. He took a picture of what he saw. When a person paints a painting, creates a masterpiece, he incorporates his own emotions and his own perception of what he saw, and his own ideas, his own creativity goes into the painting, and he invests all of that into the painting. And that's what makes the painting so like spectacular and like amazing to look at. And that's what makes it more expensive and more valuable. And so if we were all like photograph images of the same exact thing, and we all had the same opinions and we all had the same ideas and we were all coming from the same perspective, it's not nearly as valuable as every person coming with their own ideas and their own personality and their own perspective and bringing their own differences to the table. That's what creates a beautiful painting, a beautiful image, like a beautiful image with different colors and different, just the color red is not that beautiful on its own, but when you mix it with different colors, it could become a masterpiece. So yeah, that's the idea. It's a good one. Something to live by.
May we all live in a masterpiece of a world, right?
Yes.
Especially coming up.
Appreciate the masterpiece that this world is. That this world is God's creation. Every human being is God's creation. And when we look at it that way, it's such a mind shift that every person is a creation of God. And then we can appreciate our differences more than our differences enhance us. They don't take away.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much, Malka. This was very special. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A great class, really. So
lovely. Thank you all for logging on. Good to see you all. Really lovely seeing everyone.
Bye, Malka. Bye, ladies. See you next week for our last class.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Malka.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey. Hi. Mwah. Can't hear you.
Oh.
There. Now I can hear you. Hey.
Let me see. I think we're the only ones on. Okay, good.
Are you sure?
Yeah,
Hi.
Hi, Eleanor.
Hi. It's so good to see you.
we could switch to an Israel trip reunion.
Right?
Yeah,
Hi,
it's
everything.
so many good stories.
That was such a good class.
I had to run back and forth.
Is that your
What?
mom?
Yes.
Is that your mother?
Yeah.
Oh. Hello.
Hi.
I'm visiting my mother also.
How's your
She's in
mom,
the other room.
Eleanor?
Well, I'm visiting her now.
Oh.
And yeah, so I'm actually in her apartment, and I don't know if I have any. Oh, this picture, I don't know. That's my niece and her husband. I don't know if you could see it.
Wow.
Well, it's hard. It's hard to. You're talking about paintings, and here's some paintings. My mother loves art, and this one's from Israel. Like yeah. Just a moment, Mom, I'm doing this part.
Yes.
So anyway, I can't really, I told you I'm not so young, so I have like hello.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah, because a call, I need two telephones, because if you're listening on one phone and calls come in, you get interrupted. I don't know I have to figure out how to deal with this. Or do you just do it on the computer? Do you do this
I'm on my phone now. I don't have a computer here, but usually, yeah, if I have a computer, it's better to Zoom on a computer, because if the phone, if you get a phone call, it doesn't interrupt.
Right.
But you could decline the call.
Oh, you can. Yeah,
You know what? It.
You have to
decline the call. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just decline the call.
Okay. Well, anyways, it's great to
He's gonna go make air conditioning.
see you.
Great to
I love
see you,
seeing your
Eleanor.
voice. Yeah, I love seeing your voice playing in the whatever playing
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I have to go because I'm getting another call. Lots of
Bye.
love.
Be well. Well.
Bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice to see you too. Hope to see you in person. Bye.